Where is Nancy Guthrie? It is a question that has haunted investigators, her family, and thousands of people who have followed this case for months. Every time it seems like the investigation is settling into one direction, another piece of information surfaces that sends everyone looking somewhere else. Now, another development has people asking difficult questions again. This time, it involves the desert just across the border in Mexico. Anonymous tips, volunteer searches, and the discovery of dozens of unmarked graves. According to reports, none of those graves have been connected to Nancy Guthrie. Authorities have not announced any evidence placing her there, but the discoveries have renewed a conversation that has never completely gone away. Could investigators be overlooking something, or is this another lead that raises more questions than answers? Today, we're taking a closer look at why Mexico has remained part of this investigation from the very beginning, what a volunteer search group says it has uncovered, and why retired FBI investigators believe both caution and patience are essential before anyone jumps to conclusions. It's a difficult subject. It involves uncertainty, loss, and the painful reality that Nancy's family is still searching for answers. As always, we'll stick to what has been reported, acknowledge what remains unknown, and separate confirmed facts from speculation. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona, earlier this year under circumstances that investigators have repeatedly described as highly unusual. Her disappearance immediately launched an enormous investigation involving local law enforcement, the FBI, volunteers, and countless members of the public who hoped someone would notice one small detail that others had missed. Months have now passed. Searches have stretched across southern Arizona. Investigators have examined surveillance footage, followed tips, interviewed witnesses, and continued to ask the public for information. Yet one question remains unanswered. Where is Nancy? That uncertainty has created room for many different theories over the past several months. Some have been supported by evidence. Others have quickly faded away. A few continue to linger simply because investigators have never been able to rule them out completely. One of those lingering possibilities has always involved Mexico. If you've ever looked at a map of southern Arizona, the reason becomes immediately clear. Tucson sits only a relatively short drive from the international border. Beyond that lies miles upon miles of open desert, rugged mountains, isolated roads, and remote terrain that can be incredibly difficult to search. People familiar with the region often describe it as beautiful, but unforgiving. The landscape changes quickly. Dirt roads disappear into rocky hillsides. Deep washes cut across the desert floor. Thick cactus and brush make visibility difficult in many areas. In some places, a person could walk only a short distance away from a road and become almost impossible to see. That geography has made the border region an area of interest for investigators in many different criminal cases over the years. It is also why some observers have never entirely dismissed the possibility that someone connected to Nancy's disappearance may have crossed into Mexico, or attempted to. Recently, that discussion intensified after renewed attention focused on one of the reported ransom notes connected to the investigation. According to reporting from sources close to the case, investigators have been examining multiple ransom notes. Some reportedly raised immediate concerns about authenticity. Others, however, have received closer attention. One note in particular reportedly claimed that Nancy had died and was buried with nature. Those words immediately caught people's attention. What exactly did they mean? Were they intended to mislead investigators? Were they describing an actual location, or were they simply designed to create confusion? The exact answer remains unclear. Still, the wording caused many people to think once again about the vast desert landscapes surrounding southern Arizona and northern Mexico. Then, another development surfaced. A volunteer search organization based in Mexico announced that it had received anonymous information suggesting that a body matching Nancy Guthrie's description had been buried roughly 70 miles from her home. The group later said it received additional information, encouraging them to continue searching. They began conducting searches in remote desert areas near the border. So far, they have not located Nancy Guthrie. Investigators have not confirmed the group's claims, and officials have publicly indicated they have not found credible evidence connecting Nancy to those search locations. Even so, the volunteers continued looking. Then they announced something that immediately drew widespread attention. During their searches, they said they had located 25 unmarked graves. Think about that for a moment. Regardless of whether those graves have any connection to Nancy Guthrie, the discovery itself is sobering. Each unmarked grave could represent another family somewhere still waiting for answers, another missing person, another story left unfinished. For families searching for loved ones, discoveries like that are heartbreaking reminders that every search carries hope, but also tremendous uncertainty. It also raises another important question. If volunteer searchers are finding previously undiscovered burial sites in these remote areas, how should investigators evaluate information coming from those searches? Should anonymous tips be taken more seriously because they led searchers into locations where human remains were reportedly discovered? Or should investigators remain cautious until every claim can be independently verified? That question became the focus of a conversation with retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell, who has spent years investigating violent crimes and recovering evidence in difficult environments. His perspective would add an entirely new layer to the discussion, not only about the reported graves, but also about what really happens when investigators search for human remains in the desert. And some of what he explained was far different from what many people assume. When retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell was asked about the volunteer search group operating in northern Mexico, his first response wasn't to dismiss their efforts. Instead, he focused on something much bigger. He pointed out that this stretch of desert has long presented challenges for investigators on both sides of the border. According to O'Connell, criminal organizations have historically used isolated areas to dispose of victims because the terrain is vast, remote, and difficult to search. While he stressed that there is no confirmed evidence linking Nancy Guthrie's disappearance to cartel activity, he explained why reports of unmarked graves in that region immediately draw the attention of experienced investigators. If there really are multiple sets of human remains out there, he suggested, each one deserves to be identified. That process, however, is far from simple. Unlike television crime dramas, identifying remains found in remote desert locations can take months or even years. Investigators often rely on DNA testing, dental records, personal belongings, and forensic anthropology before they can make a positive identification. O'Connell also noted that DNA testing can present additional challenges in parts of Mexico. Resources vary, and many families of missing persons have never submitted DNA samples that investigators can compare against unidentified remains. Because of that, volunteer organizations sometimes find themselves working alongside grieving families who are desperately searching for answers with limited resources. It is emotional work, it is difficult work, and it often continues long after the television cameras leave. Still, when the conversation returned to Nancy Guthrie's case, O'Connell urged caution. He questioned how the anonymous tips received by the volunteer group could be verified. From an investigative standpoint, he explained, law enforcement would naturally want to know exactly where the information originated. Was it sent through email, a text message, a phone call? Could investigators trace its source? Was there any evidence supporting the claims beyond the message itself? Without those answers, investigators have to be careful not to devote valuable resources to information that cannot be confirmed. That doesn't necessarily mean the tips are false. It simply means they have to be tested like every other lead. Another subject quickly entered the discussion: the harsh reality of what happens to human remains in the desert. Many people assume that bodies remain preserved for years in dry conditions, but according to O'Connell, the reality is much more complicated. Everything depends on the environment. How hot was it? Was the body buried or left on the surface? How deep was the grave? Was there shade? Were animals able to reach the area? Was there seasonal rainfall? Every one of those factors changes the speed of decomposition. To illustrate that point, O'Connell described specialized forensic research facilities, often referred to as body farms. These research centers allow scientists to study how the human body decomposes under different environmental conditions. Some remains are placed in open fields, others beneath trees, some in water, and others in dry desert climates. Researchers document changes over weeks, months, and years, helping investigators estimate timelines and understand what evidence might still exist long after someone has disappeared. It's difficult research to think about, but it has become one of the most valuable tools available to forensic investigators. According to O'Connell, even after significant decomposition, important evidence can sometimes survive. That could include clothing, personal effects, dental structures, or other forensic clues that help investigators reconstruct what happened. For families waiting for answers, that possibility offers at least a measure of hope. The conversation then shifted back to the volunteer search group itself. O'Connell acknowledged that civilian search organizations sometimes reach places that official investigators cannot easily access. Local knowledge, community relationships, and familiarity with the terrain can occasionally make a difference. At the same time, he emphasized that discoveries made by volunteers must ultimately pass through official investigative channels. If human remains are located, preserving the scene becomes critical. Every footprint, every object, every piece of physical evidence could eventually matter in court. That's why investigators document scenes carefully before excavation continues. As the discussion unfolded, another question began to emerge. If these volunteer searches continue uncovering graves in remote parts of northern Mexico, could one future discovery finally provide investigators with the breakthrough they've been searching for? Or will Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remain one of the most puzzling unsolved investigations in recent memory? As the search for Nancy Guthrie continues, investigators are left balancing hope with realism. Every new lead has to be weighed carefully. Every anonymous tip has to be tested. Every reported sighting has to be examined against the evidence already collected. That is the difficult reality of an investigation that has now stretched on for months. One topic that also came up during the discussion with retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell was Nancy's home itself. Many people have wondered whether the house still has any importance now that investigators have processed the scene multiple times. After all, the FBI returned days after local authorities had already completed their initial examination, bringing in their own evidence response team to conduct another detailed search. O'Connell believes the home could still play an important role in the future, not necessarily because investigators expect to discover new evidence there, but because one day, if this case reaches a courtroom, jurors may need to understand exactly what happened inside that house. Walking through the property could help them appreciate the layout, the distances between rooms, the location of the doors, and how someone may have entered or left unnoticed. Details that seem minor on paper often become much clearer when people can actually stand where events unfolded. He also spoke about something more personal. When someone disappears suddenly, a home often becomes a time capsule. The coffee cup may still be sitting where it was left. Family photographs remain on the walls. A favorite blanket rests across a chair. The house preserves ordinary moments that suddenly become extraordinary because the person who lived there never returned. It's a thought that resonates with many families who have experienced an unexpected loss. Those everyday reminders become part of the story, and for loved ones, deciding when, or even whether, to change them is never easy. As for the reported searches in Mexico, there is still no public evidence connecting the newly discovered graves to Nancy Guthrie. Authorities have not confirmed that she was ever taken across the border, and investigators continue to encourage anyone with credible information to come forward through official channels. For now, the mystery remains exactly that, a mystery. Questions about the ransom notes continue. Questions about the anonymous tips continue. Questions about the desert continue. And above all, one question still stands. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Until investigators find that answer, every credible lead will likely receive attention, whether it points to the Arizona desert, the border region, or somewhere else entirely. Her family continues to wait. Investigators continue their work, and thousands of people continue hoping that one piece of evidence, one witness, or one overlooked detail will finally provide the breakthrough this case desperately needs. What do you think? Should investigators continue exploring every possible lead connected to the Mexico searches, or do you believe the answers are more likely to be found somewhere much closer to home? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoy thoughtful, fact-based coverage of ongoing investigations, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next update.